Well, I know Josh, man. He's one of my good friends. We talk a lot in the offseason. You know, I got a lot of respect for him. He got a big mouth, but he got a big game as well. And he backs it up. And he's a competitor. I'm sure he wanted to play me, but I don't know, was it his coach scheme or what they thought. But I know he wanted to play against me one-on-one the whole game if it's up to him.
They had an excellent game plan. They, executed it flawlessly. I just think, they took us behind the woodshed today and wore our tail out. They gave us a good old-fashioned butt whooping. That's what it was, and can't take anything away from that. Got to respect them. Hats off to them, and go back and get ready for next week and Dallas Cowboys.
In case you forgot, the Redskins gave a 5-year, $75 million deal to Josh Norman, yet he was rarely ever on the league's best receiver last night, Antonio Brown. And the Steelers' offense, who is missing key offensive weapons, put up 38 on their defense. Tim Hasselbeck in the house. Always good to see you.
See you.
We want to get your thoughts on this.
Okay.
Do you think Washington overpaid for Norman? Was that proven last night?
No, I don't think they necessarily overpaid for him. I just think they used him the wrong way. I mean, I think there probably has to be a bigger conversation about, well, if you're going to pay someone this much money, well, how are you going to use him? I mean, it'd be like, paying a quarterback a ton of money and then removing him to run the Wildcat. I mean, we don't see people do that anymore. So I don't think you can debate that he's one of the best corners in the game. I think when you saw him on Antonio Brown, who is clearly the best receiver in the game, he actually held his own against him. The problem was it just wasn't as often. So I think it's premature to say that. I think the bigger concern is how you're using him.
I think they did overpay him, and it's not because in a kind of vacuum he's not worth the money, but it's not a vacuum. There's a salary cap league. You have finite resources. You have a lot of situations to address. They had a D-line issue. They did not address it. They spent all the money in the secondary, where in Breland they thought they had a guy in the secondary anyway. And so what winds up happening? You get pushed around up front. So $75 million for a guy who's paid like a shutdown guy, and there's so few who have really ever lived who's a genuine shutdown guy, but he's really not a shutdown corner, but you paid him sort of shutdown cornerish money.
See,
and you have holes. You think he's a shutdown corner?
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't, and there's this kind of belief that he's like the zone defender or something. I don't think that's the case. Listen, people go away from it. I mean, listen, Antonio Brown was intentionally lined up away from him. That's the best receiver in football, and the Steelers avoided him. Like, if that doesn't tell you what the league thinks of Norman as a player, like, I don't know what does.
Well, go ahead, Steve.
Allow me to chime in here. I don't think that Josh Norman was underpaid, Max. I disagree with you there. But Tim, what I would like you to just, edify me, help me out here in terms of correcting me on whatever I have to say. I'm of the mindset that you're the Redskins. You're the ones who went out and paid him $75 million. You're the one who guaranteed him $50 million. Why are you restricting him to one side of the field as opposed to having him line up wherever the best receiver in football is? Isn't that a schematic thing? Isn't that something that Barry and Jay Gruden, your head coach, isn't that a decision that they're making? Isn't it what they're supposed to be doing? As opposed to saying, well, we're going to leave Josh Norman on this one side of the field and allowing the Steelers to just go on the opposite side no matter what. Isn't that something the Redskins coaching is supposed to correct?
It is, but I think that goes back to we hear it all the time about coaches versus scouts or personnel departments. The reality is that Joe Barry didn't decide to make him the highest paid corner. Jay Gruden didn't decide to make him the highest paid corner. That's what happens when personnel departments decide to pay a certain player or do a certain thing. And listen, we saw it with the Houston Texans. Bill O'Brien never had a conversation with Brock Osweiler before he became his starting quarterback. Like, I think sometimes we get it wrong when we start to assume that a quarterback coach or an offensive coordinator or even a head coach has the type of influence on personnel that we just kind of make that assumption.
But you just said he's a shutdown corner. So if
I think he is.
So, but the coaching staff doesn't?
So they're not using him correctly, would be what I say, yes. Which I think is Stephen A's point.
But I also ask this question. I find it hard to believe that a personnel department for any team in the National Football League would just go out and pay a player a boatload of money without hearing from the coaches about what they think about the individual and how they think the individual could be utilized, which is why I'm looking at the Redskins coaching staff for what transpired with Josh Norman yesterday. But I also will say this last point, and then I'll give it to you guys. I spoke to a couple of cats last night, and one of the things that they said to me was that Josh Norman should have asked for Antonio Brown. You know, the hell with just going along with what the Redskins coaches schematically had put forth. The bottom line is if you're that dude, you ask for it. They even pointed out how D'Angelo Hall, in the past, when he was playing corner, would have never just sat idly by and accepted the assignment. He would have insisted that he be the one going up against an elite wide receiver. He would have wanted that assignment. I don't know whether that's the case with Josh Norman or not. I believe that Josh Norman ain't shying away from none of that. But you do have people this morning questioning how bad Josh Norman wanted some of Antonio Brown in his first game with the Redskins in a nationally televised Monday Night Football game. There are people who have texted me who are questioning how much Josh Norman wanted Antonio Brown.
Listen, I've never seen Josh Norman shy away from going against anybody.
Neither have I.
I would think that Josh Norman would want the challenge. To, you know, why, and to your point about speaking up on it, Stephen A., I've seen people speak up on it before, and it's not out of, you know, for a number one guy to say, hey, listen, I want the challenge. I think it probably is about the dynamic of being a new guy, and you heard his quotes after the game talking about, look, I'm not questioning coaches. They know more than me. Here's why you don't do it, and I think this is, it's important to make this point because everyone's saying, this is crazy, he doesn't follow everyone all over the field. Guys, in a new system, on a new team, and I think we all agree we would rather have him playing outside the numbers than Breland on Antonio Brown. Sure. Well, Todd Haley doesn't just line these guys up in stationary spots for the entire game. What happens when he's in the slot and you have some type of Mike nickel-will blitz called? Well, now all of a sudden you've got your nickel-will blitzing, who happens to be Josh Norman, who is planning on being lined up against Antonio Brown.
Tim,
so now what's the check?
Tim,
what's
can
the
I
check
ask you a question?
Yeah.
I have another question. Are we giving D'Angelo Hall a pass? Because I'm thinking you're a free safety, you played corner, you're highly intelligent, you played in this game for a very long time. Josh Norman is supposed to be that guy capable of being a shutdown corner, clearly a top 5 corner in the game. So if the Redskins got him, then shouldn't D'Angelo Hall have been the one over the top? Because I did see him in the vicinity when Antonio Brown caught both of his touchdown passes. So was he late getting over? Are we letting him off the hook in terms of not pointing out what D'Angelo Hall was supposed to do? Or is this simply about the coaches?
There's no question. I mean, part of it is not knowing what they've asked of D'Angelo Hall on that play. You look at 2 4th-down plays, okay? Same formation, same exact play call. Breland gets beat on the go route by Antonio Brown on the first one. D'Angelo Hall, my estimation, is out of position. Why he isn't helping Breland there on a go route, I think is whether he was coached that way in terms of his alignment or whatever reason. The next time they do it, look at how deep he is. Look at how deep he learned his lesson. He's a smart football player. Learned his lesson, he was deep, which is why the same exact play is called. And where did Ben go with the football? He went to Eli Rogers on the over route, the very next play. So, look, part of it is, all right, this is what you did with Norman. All right, well, when Breland is on Antonio Brown, how are you helping him? I think this is less about Josh Norman and more about the staff and the plan on the defensive side of the ball for Washington.
I don't think it's about Josh Norman per se, but I do think that where they chose to invest resources, like a guy like Terrence Knighton, whether or not he's still a world beater and everything, you let him walk. What do you do about the middle of your defensive line? And then you're up against a quarterback, too, in Ben Roethlisberger, who's, I think, at the best he's ever played, behind a great offensive line, checking down, improvising, and even when your defense starts to do some good things, he still figures out a way to make lemonade out of lemons.
Yeah, well, listen, I don't disagree with any of that on Ben. I think they feel like they're making do with guys like Chris Baker in the middle. I mean, I think that's how they felt about it. I think we have to just say, well, listen, hey, how are you using this guy that you're paying all the money to? In my estimation, he's still a great player. I don't know if they're using him the right way.
It's going to be very interesting to see if they change their plan now, because he has Des Bryant this week and then ODB the following.
Well, that's why you would think you would go play him, because you're going to play, Odell Beckham Jr. twice. You're going to play Dez twice. You're going to play people in these divisions twice. So that's how I look at it.
But all eyes will be on that secondary for sure, which led us to our question here for you guys. We want you to weigh in at home. Which is the best quarterback wide receiver duo of all time? Montana Rice, Manning Harrison, Brady Moss, Roethlisberger Brown. Did we miss one? Go to the First Take Twitter page to vote. We'll share those results a little later in the show. But coming up next.
First Take is brought to you by Cricket Wireless, something to smile about. And Liberty Mutual Insurance. Liberty stands with you.
We asked you earlier in the show, which is the best quarterback wide receiver duo of all time? The results are in. Montana Rice with 42%, Brady Moss with 28%, Big Ben Brown with 16%, and Manning and Harrison with 14%. Fellas, what you think about that?
They got it just right in my order. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh.
I'm glad that I could educate the public, Stephen A.
Well, listen, I mean, it's hard to argue against Brady and Randy Moss. I certainly will concede that. But I think the 3-year run that AB and Big Ben Roethlisberger have been on is something that I haven't seen. And I think that right now Antonio Brown is just on another stratosphere.
Yeah.
And I've never seen that on that level before. We've seen Randy Moss, yes, but we haven't seen the combo of a quarterback, wide receiver, hooking up to this degree in NFL
because
history.
Tom Brady,
375 receptions in 3 years.
Because who's Tom Brady after all?
Yeah.
I mean, Brady and Moss had 23 touchdowns one season. 23 TDs one season.
How long do you need to see Antonio Brown do it for before he's in
Well, he's not going for peak. He's going for career. That's Montana Rice. They got to double what they've done to really talk about Montana and Rice.
Stephen A.
Double it.
Okay.
If you're missing Max and I after the show, we're going to be on Facebook Live answering all the fans' questions. If you want to jump on, if you have any questions for us, anything you want to throw at us, we'll be there. We know you're big on Facebook.
I guess my response is I'm proud of both of y'all for working after 12 noon. I appreciate it. Y'all got it good.
Really? What'd he do over the weekend? What'd this guy do over the weekend?
That's true.
What's he doing this next weekend?
He does do boxing. He's the best.
This is just his day job.
He's the best.
Now, as for me,
and by the way, I apologize that we
working.
haven't talked about Triple G yet.
Tomorrow?
Yes.
Should we talk about it tomorrow?
Triple G
tomorrow.
I have a lot of questions why they stopped it. I got a lot of things for you, Max. More First Take tomorrow. Stay tuned.